Professor Richard Dawkins, and he's very welcome.
Last year at the TAM conference, Phil Plait got a lot of applause for a talk about how to communicate atheism, and he began by taking a vote of people who used to be religious and were now atheists, and he got a great show of hands. And he then said, how many of you changed your mind as a result of being called an idiotic retard? Well, not surprisingly, he got the result that he wanted. Obviously, if somebody is a really deep-seated religious person, then if you call them an idiotic retard, you're unlikely to change their mind. However, my view, as I suppose somebody who never calls anybody, I hope, an idiotic retard, but does call their views idiotic, there's a big difference, as various people today have mentioned. I like to quote the English journalist Johann Hari, who said, I respect you too much to respect your idiotic beliefs. Now, my audience, the audience that I'm aiming at, are on the whole not dyed-in-the-wool faith heads, and not the sort of people who are never going to change their mind, and certainly not if you call them idiotic retards. My audience are people who are sitting on the fence. And I think there are enormous numbers of such people, very often because they haven't really ever met the counter-arguments. I warmed to the description of the Texas people for whom the very idea of disbelieving in God would be rather equivalent to disbelieving in the president or something like that. If you're dealing with people who've never even met the idea that it's possible to disbelieve in God, then those are people who might very well, I think, be influenced in a way that people who are deeply religious for reasons of scriptural conviction or something would be unlikely to change their minds. And so I don't mind calling, I wouldn't think I'd actually use the phrase idiotic retard, but something equivalent. I think that ridicule, as various people have said today, ridicule is a fine weapon. I'm not sure where it fits on the Malcolm X, Martin Luther King scale. I certainly don't want to advocate violence in any way, but ridicule seems to me a more subtle weapon. And ridicule, although it won't influence the people who are necessarily being ridiculed or their views are being ridiculed, it may very well influence people who are sitting on the fence or who didn't really realize that there was a fence to sit on, and tell them that there is a fence to sit on. And I wanted to read a passage from the great Nobel Prize-winning biologist Peter Medawar, who's always been a great, I suppose, role model of mine. When I was a young man, an undergraduate, I read Father Teilhard de Chardin's book, The Phenomenon of Man, and I'm sorry to confess that I was very impressed by it and became briefly a convert to Teilhard de Chardin's kind of bullshit. And what won me round, what converted me, was reading Peter Medawar's review of The Phenomenon of Man, which I think is one of the greatest negative book reviews ever written. And the point I want to make is that I did not recoil from having this book that I had previously revered ridiculed. Quite the contrary. I saw it was the ridicule that changed my mind. And I want to read a bit to illustrate that you don't have to use violent. Has it gone off? No. You don't have to use violent language. You can use wit. You can use sarcasm, and you can use ridicule. The phenomenon of man cannot be read without a feeling of suffocation, a gasping and flailing around for sense. There is an argument in it, to be sure, a feeble argument, abominably expressed. and this I shall expound in due course. But consider first the style, because it is the style that creates the illusion of content, and which is a cause as well as merely a symptom of Teilhard's alarming apocalyptic seizures. The phenomenon of man stands square in the tradition of Naturphilosophie, a philosophical indoor pastime of German origin, which does not seem, even by accident, though there is a great deal of it, to have contributed anything of permanent value to the storehouse of human thought. French is not a language that lends itself naturally to the opaque and ponderous idiom of nature philosophy, and Teilhard has accordingly resorted to the use of that tipsy, euphoristic prose poetry, which is one of the more tiresome manifestations of the French spirit. And then there's a gap, and then he comes to the end. How have people come to be taken in by the phenomenon of man? And remember, I was one of them. I was taken in. How have they come to be taken in by the phenomenon of man? We must not underestimate the size of the market for works of this kind, for philosophy fiction. Just as compulsory primary education created a market catered for by cheap dailies and weeklies, so the spread of secondary and latterly of tertiary education has created a large population of people, often with well-developed literary and scholarly tastes, who have been educated far beyond their capacity to undertake analytical thought. Now, that's ridicule, but that's ridicule using the rapier, using the scalpel, rather than using the club, the baseball bat. And that's the route that I would urge us to take. The beliefs that these people hold are ridiculous, and they need to be exposed as ridiculous. We need satire, we need comedy. We had a wonderful exhibition of that last night. We need wit. So that's one point that I would like to make in communicating atheism. Don't let's accommodate, but also don't let's be violent, at least not even in words, let alone deeds, against individuals. But let's use violent language, not violent language, let's use very negative language, including ridicule, against their ridiculous beliefs. The other point I wanted to make about communicating atheism is the importance of what I've called consciousness raising. And this is something where we have something to learn from the feminist movement, which succeeded brilliantly in changing the language that we all use. So when I was young, it was perfectly commonplace to use a phrase like one man, one vote. You can't do that anymore. Anybody who deliberately uses sexist language, anybody who uses sexist language is probably doing it deliberately in order to provoke. Everybody, whether they use it or not, has had their consciousness raised, and our language has changed as a consequence. And that's one of the things that I want us to do in the atheist movement. I want us to change our language in a consciousness-raising way. Well, thank you very much. I want us to change our language in a consciousness-raised way. And particularly, I've made this point many times before, I make no apology for doing it again, with respect to the labeling of children. Because it's children who are really the key to the whole religious ambition. No wonder they're so keen, so almost fanatically keen, to keep their claws, their hooks on education. We heard a lot about that this morning. It's obviously a terrible situation in Ireland, needs to be remedied as rapidly as possible. The religious lobby, the religious organizations desperately want to keep their hands on education. They really want to be able to indoctrinate successive generations of children. And one of the main things in their favor is the assumption that we all make, almost all of us make, that children are properly labeled with the religion of their parents. And even this morning, I forget which one of the panelists it was on the education panel, referred to, not quite directly, but indirectly, Catholic children. There is no such thing as a Catholic child. And we should never, ever use a phrase like Catholic child. We should never play into their hands by acknowledging this presumption that a child is to be labelled as automatically inheriting the religion of their parents. And this came up indirectly in the education discussion when those people advocating a change in the Irish system were talking about the rights of parents to withdraw their children from religion classes. And that, of course, is very important, and that's worth fighting for. But somebody from the audience made the point that that completely neglects the right of the child to be protected from the religious indoctrination inspired by their parents. Now, this is an exercise in consciousness raising. One of the ways that I have chosen to do it is to imagine how we would feel if we heard somebody talking about a postmodernist child, a secular humanist child, a Gramscian Marxist child. It's funny when you think about those things, but nobody flinches for one moment when they hear the phrase Catholic child, Muslim child. But it's exactly the same. There is absolutely no reason why you should call a child a Muslim child any more than you would call a child a secular humanist child or a socialist child. Nobody would ever talk about a socialist child, a Marxist child, a postmodernist child. You wouldn't dream of it. I suspect that the very use of that parallel has now raised the consciousness of everybody in this room. They will never again let pass the phrase Catholic child, or Anglican child, or Muslim child, or Hindu child. And so that's my second message about communicating atheism. You don't necessarily, obviously I want to communicate rational messages and rational arguments as well, and that goes without saying. Most of my books are about that. But consciousness raising is another way of doing it. And that's the second of the points that I wanted to raise. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're taking questions.
I don't think I'm lying when I say that the people, our side, in the YouTube's war, are actually on mopping up operations now. Reason has won that battle. But what my idea was, and maybe this is a mini pitch to Professor Dawkins, re the foundation, is that we can take these YouTube videos, which have been so useful to us, speaking English, and I know that they're translated into French and German and other languages, but could we start subtitling them, or maybe voice-overing in Persian, in Farsi, and sending them out on the YouTube again, so that they can get a whole new audience and communicate our ideas. People who are ready to receive them, I'm quite sure. They are much safer now because there is the Tor system on the internet where you can Google Tor, and what they will do is they will give you an IP address that appears that if you're in Tehran, that you're actually in Bern or Los Angeles or Dublin. So they won't be caught by the authorities. And I think we have an excellent opportunity here to communicate our views to an audience that we really shouldn't neglect, because they are our friends and colleagues. Thank you very much.
We'll certainly look into the possibility of doing that. It's the kind of thing that my foundation might very well love to do. Thank you. Brilliant idea.
Is it appropriate to be a skeptic about everything, including religion, or can we leave that bit out? Because for pragmatic reasons, discussing homeopathy and all these other things, you don't want to offend people by bringing up religion.
I think the thrust of the question was that in the skeptics movement, the skeptical inquirer and so on, there's a kind of taboo among at least certain members that you mustn't attack religion. And I met this when the skeptical inquirer movement, what were they called, psychop, honoured me, gave me some kind of an honour, and my acceptance speech was an attack on religion, and I was roundly castigated for this, possibly because it might have affected fundraising. I don't know what the reason might have been, but it seems to me to be a nonsense. The defence offered is that religion is fine as long as it doesn't step on science's toes. Religion always steps on science's toes. Religion postulates miracles, virgin birth, raising people from the dead, walking on water. This is all anti-scientific, and if you remove the miracles from religion, you've got nothing left that any congregation would be swayed by. So I don't see any need or reason to separate skepticism about whatever, dowsing and telepathy and things from skepticism about gods. This is all skepticism, and we all should be in the same boat.
I'm wondering if our use of language such as anti-religion, say no to this, fight religion, is possibly ostracizing. We were talking about women earlier on, why they're not getting as involved, and Helene Sizou and Julia Kristeva, two feminist theorists, talk about binary language, yes, no, anti-pro. So if possibly in the media or PR kind of thing of talking about, instead of anti-religion, pro-human rights, or yes to free thought as opposed to no to something else, and I'm wondering just if you could comment on whether that's maybe going too far or taking away lines of language, or if it's something that would possibly open up to other people who feel intimidated by atheism, which I certainly did at first.
That's a great point. And I'm seeing a really great new trend recently. I'm going to these conferences and I'm seeing people who, like me, didn't come up through the sciences into this, but came through a different direction, through marketing and communications. And they're being very vocal about how our language does affect the audience we're trying to reach. And I'm a big fan of using all different tactics to reach out to different audiences. And I do believe that there's an audience out there that will be more receptive if we do focus more on the compassionate aspects of our movement. We're not just telling people that their religion is wrong. We're actively trying to help people. We're trying to stop people from getting conned. We're trying to stop women from being beaten down. And I think focusing on those compassionate aspects can really bring more people into the fold. And you're absolutely right about language. Oftentimes, I think we fall into the trap of using the other side's language. We shy away from using the word, some of us shy away from using the word atheist because, oh, it's too negative. Well, it's negative because the other side made it negative, and if we come up with another word, they're going to make that one negative too. So it's best just to take the one we've got and be bold about it, speak out about it, make it into a positive word. So I love that more atheists are thinking that way and getting the message out there that yes, language matters and that we should use it in a smarter way to reach out to new audiences.
People can make shit up on the internet a lot easier than the other platforms of communication. So maybe that's the toughest out of them all. And because you have to wade through all that crap to get your message out there, it's maybe it's not the most effective platform. So whichever, the most effective and the toughest.
I'm very pleased with the YouTube atheist community. There's a great deal of talent out there. There are people that are producing very well-researched videos with a lot of good content. And whenever anyone gets anything wrong, and I'm sorry to say I know this from experience, when you make an error in having an argument with a theist, whether you're talking about science or what have you, there's a very good chance that if you make an error, they won't catch it because they don't understand what you're talking about anyway. But your own side will. Scientists are, by and large, unforgiving of error. They will point it out. And so you do have a community where people actually do care that the information that they get out there is accurate. And they try to make sure that it is accurate before they press send to upload that. I mean, there are people for whom accountability really does matter, and that they feel that they're making a contribution, and by the number of subscriptions that they get, a lot of these people are making contribution. I was lucky in that I got in early in the wave of YouTube atheists, because there was a lot of very talented, very brilliant people out there. If you name a topic, I'll show you an expert who's posting on the web. Really an excellent resource. And the advantage that we have in YouTube is that we are going up, especially in Texas, we have more mega churches in Dallas than I think any other city. And a mega church is a church with like 4,000 seats or more. We have churches where we had people like Olstein who had to buy a stadium so that he could fit the 50,000 head-bobbing, mouth-breathing, glassy-eyed wanna-believers. And they just eat up whatever he says because it's all emotional. There's nothing that's defined, there's nothing that's factual, it's all an emotional thing. And then they hand over all that tithing. So he's making tens of millions of dollars a day. We're doing this altruistically for free. We're posting YouTube videos. We're not making anything out of this. This is for the benefit and the betterment of mankind. And I'm very happy to say there's a whole lot of people that feel the same way that I do that are making videos in that mode.
Absolutely. The YouTube user Thunderfoot has organized the Draw Mohammed Day for 2 years now, and I think this is quite widely accepted and considered a successful thing. But then he went a bit further with this hard drive full of copies of the Quran. I don't know if the panel is familiar with that. He's basically stuffed a hard drive full of Qurans, and then he's burned that hard drive with the idea that these digital files are being deleted anyway as internet caches are being purged. So burning the hard drive physically is not going that much further. But this act seems to have polarized the online community quite a bit, and he's taken quite a lot of heat for that. So I'm curious about what the panel thinks about that. Thank you.
I think a parallel case is PZ's desecration of a communion wafer, because that really is pure ridicule. I mean, that is saying this is just a cracker, and you are of course hurting people's feelings, but they deserve to have their feelings hurt because it is just a cracker. It's their fantasy. It's not book-burn.
But we must not forget the satanic verses and how that was really burnt, actually burnt, not virtually.
Yes, yes. But in the case of the satanic verses, there were some disgraceful examples of intellectuals, certainly in Britain. I think of Hugh Trevor Roper, the historian, and various other people who actually condemned Salman Rushdie and said that he deserved what he got. Because he refused to take seriously what, as Michael Dummett, the philosopher, said, refused to take seriously what other men find sacred. And that was a disgraceful betrayal by senior intellectuals in Britain of one of their number.